He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an advertising agency strategist with 25 years of experience in the ad business. And together, we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing conversation about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. Well, Henry, we're back, and today I thought we'd talk about something that's dear to both our hearts. It's an extension of what the creative brief can do and should do, and that is, what is its role when we review creative? And I've had the pleasure of delivering a workshop for the ANA on this very topic, and we break it down into a couple of things. So one of the things I like to emphasize when we do creative reviewing, and this is really to the marketers, not for the creatives, because they're the ones whose work is being reviewed. But marketers are asking me, well, what can I do to have a better conversation with the creative department so that I can get the best work out of them? And my response is, well, first and foremost, reviewing is about doing something. I can't tell you how to do it. We need to practice how to do it. So it's built around role playing. And that requires us to really have that creative brief right in front of us so we can have a measuring stick. We treat the creative brief like a measuring stick to engage the creatives and ask them, well, what were you thinking when you came up with this idea? Demonstrate for me how the single-minded proposition plays out in this piece of creative. How did you actually address the problem that you were trying to create? So more than anything else, it's practicing how do we do this, because having that conversation is a two-way street, and getting it in abstraction doesn't work. So we have people role playing, and it works pretty well. What are some of your thoughts on how to use the brief in reviewing creative?
So in an agency situation, I think really the first and probably the most important step where this happens is when I see the creative for the first time before we take it to the client. So I have my brief with me in hand, and if I don't have it in hand, I have it memorized because I wrote it, but I know what the brief is about. I know what our single-minded proposition is. And so I'm listening to them pitch the ideas, and my criteria is it on strategy? Now, I joined an agency a few years back, not this agency, where the agency was in trouble and potentially could lose the account because they were complaining that the work that they were getting seemed all over the place. And I quickly realized that the ideas that were being presented to the client didn't have any sort of attachment at all to the strategies. So I became active with the creative director in having these early meetings before the work was completely fleshed out and ready to present. In the early meetings, when the creators were pitching their ideas to the creative director, I would sit in and I could help steer ideas that were tangentially on brief to be more on brief. I could steer ideas that were off brief to be on brief. And I could help the creative director decide which ideas weren't on brief at all and probably shouldn't be considered. And then there's the rare exception where they're not on brief, but it's actually a great idea, and it makes me, and we've talked about that. So that, again, that's kind of a rare thing. But that's where I like to get involved and use the brief. Then usually what happens is we have a pool of work that's going to move forward to the client, and we're going to present it in some format, usually a deck or something. And what I'll do is, to set up each idea, I might pull the parts of the brief that idea most reflects, right? To say, remember in the brief it said X, Y, and Z, or in our strategy it said this. This is what this idea is about. And because the truth is we have a single-minded proposition, but sometimes the idea is inspired by the target description or by something else in the brief. So that's where I make the case for this is on brief, because the idea did come from the brief.
Well, one thing that you and I have talked about and agree, I think, wholeheartedly on is when the creatives and the marketers, or the client and the creatives are in the room together, one of the things that I tell the client side is to avoid certain words when they're reviewing their creative. And the two biggies, which I think you and I both agree on, are I think or I like.
I like is the word.
I like. Yeah. I say that your opinion really matters not one whit. It's about reflecting the brief. The brief is the measuring stick, as I said before. So get used to the idea of eliminating the I like or even the I think, because it doesn't matter, and say, ask questions that reflect from the brief. Tell me what you think. How did you come up with this idea? How does this reflect the brief? Give me your thinking about that. You could own every single version of the product stuffed in your garage. That still wouldn't make you the target audience. Yep. Because you are the brand, you are the customer, you are the client. So stay away from certain words like I like, because it doesn't matter.
So the real catch-22 with I like is that they might like it for the right reasons, because it's on brief, it's on strategy or whatever, but it's such a big term that you have junior clients or whatever around the table, and they'll say I like it, and they just mean they like it, like they like it as a consumer. And that's what we don't want. We want them to say, I think that this idea is on strategy. I think that this idea will work with a target consumer. I think this idea is likely to break through. Likely is a much better word than like. Like, is it likely to break through? Is it likely to solve the communication problem? It's a much better word than saying I like, where, I like is subjective. A lot of people don't like Picasso, but that doesn't matter. He's still a genius. It's,
Right. Well, it's also about asking the question, you like it, but will it scale? How do you see this working in other media? Exactly. Is this a one-off idea, or can you see this campaignable? So when you engage the creative department and ask questions about where the idea came from, what were you thinking, this creates a conversation, and I think it's far less confrontational as well. Now, you also pointed out something in a previous conversation, and we have many of these conversations offline, which spark ideas for our shows. You said something that I really liked. You said juniors should be seen but not heard. Talk about that some more.
So yeah, in fact, one of our friends, Vivek, he teaches seminars for clients on how to get better advertising out of their agencies, and he has he calls the junior clients juniorcito and juniorcita, the male female junior in Spanish, and the truth is, a lot of times the big challenge when you're presenting creative is getting around juniorcito and juniorcita that have been empowered by the leaders at the table. And I think that's a bad move by the leaders at the table. Mm-hmm. The reality is they're there to learn. They should be hearing what the CMO or the brand manager has to say and learn from how he evaluates and talks about the creative. This isn't a round table. It shouldn't be a round table. Ultimately, there's one person at that table who is going to take the fall or get the credit if, depending on the situation. And I think that they should be listening to that person and not be giving their uninformed opinion. It's like anything, before you can be a master, you have to be an apprentice, and you have to watch before you put your hand on the lathe or on the wrench or whatever it is. So I'm a big firm believer in that. Don't put your juniors in the situation where they have to, because they're going to come with I like and not give them more in-depth feedback.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Grasshopper. Good job, Henry.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Henry, today for our creative review, we're going to look at some new creative from Heinz, produced by a Canadian shop called Rethink. Let's take a look at it. But some thoughts that I had when I was looking at these examples, which are home pages on the website, as well as some outdoor billboard campaigns. I guess I've got a bit of a thing for visual solutions. My background is copy. I love long form copy, but I've also loved writing, clever headlines and attention grabbing headlines. But I also really struggled with finding solutions that didn't require any kind of headline. Struggled in the sense that was my challenge for myself when I was a working copywriter. So when I see a campaign like this one that doesn't use language, that doesn't use headlines, it almost always draws my attention. And then I study to see, well, does this work? And here's an example of something that really works. And it takes advantage of a legacy message of Heinz has always been worth the wait, right? And as I was saying to you before we started recording, I thought, this seems like one of those obvious ideas. Why didn't somebody think of this a long time ago? And, you had an interesting comment. You said, well, it might have been in the works for many years, struggling its way up the pipeline of approval until finally someone said, okay, let's do this. And now it's emerging. This could be 3 or 4 years old. We don't know. Whether it is or not, I think it's brilliant work. What do you think?
I think it's brilliant work as well. And so the first element that you see in the Ad Age article that we were both looking at is that, landing page and says that it takes 57 minutes to load, right? Because of Heinz 57. And nobody is going to sit there waiting for 57 minutes for a page to load. But here's the brilliant thing about it. Nobody's going to see a ketchup website anyway. So this is PR. This is strictly a PR thing that you go onto their website, a website you would never go on to anyway, to see the thing ticking and saying, well, it's loading and it's going to load for 57 minutes. So I think it's brilliant in that sense, in that it draws attention to a website that people probably aren't going to. I mean, why would anyone go to a ketchup website, particularly a brand leader like Heinz? Like, we all kind of know what Heinz is. This is good reminder advertising, right? Like, hey, we still exist. We're still the best ketchup you can buy. All those things are kind of just implicit in it because of the memories that people have. And speaking of memories, the other reason I think it's genius is, Heinz ketchup, for the longest time, their whole thing was the anticipation of getting the ketchup out of the bottle, right? So back in the old days, before we had these squeezed bottles that you put upside down in the refrigerator, right, with a wide mouth, we had those glass ketchup bottles, and you take, particularly when they were new, you take off the lid, and because there was a vacuum in there, and the ketchup is thick, it wouldn't come out, and you'd have to bang it, and at that time, the agency, and I could probably research it, but the agency took that perceived possible negative and made it into a positive, like Heinz is worth waiting for. And they even had, I don't know if you remember the jingle, there was Anticipation. I think it was a song. Yep. I want to say it was Carly Simon, maybe.
I think you're right.
Anticipation, it's making me wait. And it was this whole idea that Heinz is the ketchup you'd wait for. So, we talked about researching for a brief, right? So this, to me, goes right at the heritage of the brand. What is the heritage of the brand? Like I said, today everybody has a squeeze bottle in their fridge of ketchup. It's not a problem that you have to wait for it. But it does harken back to that time, and I think people still relate to that. So brilliant on them. They also had the other executions, the outdoor with the kind of spinning wheel of death that you get like when something is loading on your computer and it's not really loading. You have no way of knowing if it's really loading. This is a little bit of a PR stunt, a little bit of an advertising play, and I think that's great. Integrated, the more media you have, I think it's been proven. Every media that you add to a campaign makes the campaign perform better in terms of effectiveness.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.